Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was bound to happen eventually because apparently the problem with South Africa is white supremacy. Well, so says Cyril Ramaphosa. But before we get on to the main story of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. Now, Ramaphosa is currently doing an NGC. That's a National General Conference or Council in Boxberg, which runs from Monday to Thursday and is billed as a stock take on the 30 years of the ANC in power and whether the party can renew itself or die. Now, my vote or my wish is, well, die. I'd really love to see the party die. Now, on the agenda is renewal, leadership succession, discipline, factionalism, municipal collapse, public procurement reform, and alliance tensions, specifically with the SACP's election plans for it to contest the elections without the ANC in 2026. Now, Ramaphosa repeated warnings that the ANC must undergo a thorough journey of renewal or it will perish. He says that he links the renewal to better cadre quality, ethics, internal discipline, and an end to criminality, careerism, and factionalism in the party. But you see, the problem is Ramaphosa has been on about this now for like how long? Like as long as he's president, and he's been there for nearly 2.5 terms. This is just more of the same, in my opinion. Now, Ramaphosa says that there's no room for criminals and extortionists, which in my view means that there's no room for the ANC, and to that I agree. Now, Ramaphosa says that ANC renewal means ejecting criminals, corrupt elements, extortionists, and factionists from the organization. But the problem is, whilst he says we must eject criminals and the corrupt, what he tends to forget is that they constantly seem to re-elect the same corruption accused over and over and over again. And I've done numerous videos just on the Joburg recent elections of their regional chair and how that individual was a corruption accused. Now, he ties all of this to evidence merging from the Police Capture Commission, which has implicated senior ANC figures, such as Bekisela, allegedly who received cash from an accused criminal. Now, he frames the Police Capture Commission and the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee as key to restoring trust in the criminal justice system. And to that, I would say, is that before or after the key witnesses are being assassinated? Now, Ramaphosa also attacked the outsourcing culture in municipalities and departments, saying, too many tenders go to middlemen or women with no capacity, a waste of public fund that fuels corruption and is not real empowerment. And he says that outsourcing core functions has hollowed out the state and made workers' jobs as precarious as the tender cycle system itself. And he calls for the ending of outsourcing of basic public functions and the implementation of the Public Procurement Act and the new Procurement Office to curb tender manipulation, bribery, overpricing, and front companies, whilst claiming that this will still build black and women-owned businesses. But for this, whilst the news had come out as well on the same day that Ramaphosa, an individual who is currently being suggested as a potential replacement president, has opened up the bidding process to energy suppliers who have, well, zero energy experience. And so from that front, we can view Ramaphosa's suggestions as nothing more than, yet again, more twaddle that he thinks individuals want to hear. Now, he acknowledges that towns and cities are failing to deliver basic services. The presidency has working groups intervening in metros like eThekwini and Johannesburg, with the Times Live piece also suggesting that the KZN ANC leader, Mark, admitting that regaining eThekwini will not be a walk in the park and that the KZN government of provincial unity is under pressure from the MK party's vote of no confidence, but insists that the unity government will continue for stability and efficient use of resources. Now, Ramaphosa says that unity of the SACP, the ANC and COSATU is critical to advancing the national democratic revolution, that old Soviet bull rubbish to usher in a socialist state. And he warns that the SACP's decision to contest elections alone threatens alliance unity and has already cost them by-election votes. Now, in terms of the internal renewal, well, the emphasis is on raising ethical standards and enforcing discipline, tightening leadership election processes and political education, and a compulsory court on ethics for ANC members. But I am reminded that just because you send somebody through a course doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly they know what to do and they'll do it. Because you can educate them all you want, you can make them go on as many courses as you want, but if the individuals have no ethics, well, they're still going to steal, and you pretty much can't stop them from doing that. So one inevitably still has to raise the inevitable question, which is why are they, time and time again, electing the same corruption accused to positions of authority over and over again? Now, the ANC's Veterans League has also issued their own motion at this conference, where they have suggested that what you should inevitably have is one member and one vote, as a proposal to overhaul how ANC leaders are elected. And I must be honest and say, I had no idea that it wasn't this way, because that's usually how democracy works. Now, the purpose of this is to eliminate vote buying, long entrenched at ANC conferences, and it would apply to the top 7 officials. So how exactly would it work? Well, all ANC members in good standing would nominate candidates directly instead of branch delegates doing so. Each member would nominate 4 candidates per top position, as a total of 28 names, equal between men and women. Have to have that equality because, the whole ANC socialist rubbish. And the provinces would submit nominee lists for NEC members. On election day, a national ballot lists the top 4 nominees per position, and members would vote directly. So why exactly are they pushing for this? Well, the whole thing comes back to the CR17 campaign, with vote buying being back on the agenda because, according to the Youth League, vote buying has plagued the ANC for decades. Cash payments had been made to delegatees housed in faction-controlled hotels, and even banning phones and voting booths. The Gauteng Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, has publicly backed the proposal, saying that no faction can buy all members, and several provinces have shown support in 2022, and support may have grown since. Now, should the NGC endorse this proposal, a constitutional amendment will be required of the ANC's constitution, which possibly will take place in December 2027. So it will be too late to impact the 2026 municipal by-elections. Though talking of the municipal by-elections, Ramaphosa still admits the municipalities are being failed across the country, and he says that intervention teams have been placed in eThekwini and Johannesburg and others, with the ANC suggesting that it intends to turn these municipalities around. But again, I'm reminded that Ramaphosa has been banging this drum for years. And at this point in time, all I can personally say is we can hear all about these lovely little conference suggestions and all the little things that the ANC wants to do to renew itself, but renewal is never going to happen. The ANC's been promising to renew itself for years. They've been promising to uplift the economy for years. Everything has got worse under the ANC's watch, and from my personal opinion, it's just time for a change. We just need new leadership. The ANC's time is done. Now, Ramaphosa says that in terms of the economy, it has improved recently after 15 years of stagnation. He says that business figures reportedly say confidence is on the rise. And he highlights South Africa's removal from the grey listing as a pro, something that's helped the country very recently. He also highlights a 1 trillion rand infrastructure plan and a 100 billion rand renewable investment in the Northern Cape. And he says numerous reforms are underway at Eskom, Transnet and PRASA. But again, I've heard these things since he started his first regime. Nothing has changed. The Republic remains worse now than when Ramaphosa first came to power and we had Ramaphoria. This shows so many contradictions. The Port, rail and power grids are still failing, but he's still promising reform. The municipal finances are collapsing, but he's still promising, don't worry, we're somehow going to fix it. And now we've got the whole promises of the NHI. He says he's going to implement the NHI as soon as possible, and it's going to be wonderful. But in other news, the Chris Hani Hospital was once the world's biggest hospital. I bet you didn't know that. I didn't know that until I read this. Well, it's now in functional collapse. It's dangerously overcrowded, staff shortages are everywhere, and it has broken infrastructure. Load shedding impacts patient care, and equipment shortages and maintenance crises are everywhere, which is a direct contradiction to what Ramaphosa says in terms of the NHI. He says we are investing in health facilities. Health facilities via the NHI are the future. The largest hospital in the world, once a benchmark of success of the greatness of South Africa, in functional collapse. This is what Ramaphosa brings. But don't worry, he says also, we have this amazing thing that's going on with the energy grid, because at the moment, we don't have load shedding, he says. Aren't you lucky? Well, in other news, Eskom has also finally granted emergency relief to energy-intense smelters, which will prevent mass retrenchment. And this is after we've had all the debates on the shutting down of this key, fragile, important industry in South Africa. It's all been dependent on a bespoke Eskom deal. Now remember, Eskom is state-controlled, so it's the state that have been collapsing the smelters through these deals. But this does raise other questions, which is why should households and small businesses carry the burden of funding big industry that now gets a relief? Now onto the main story, and this is Ramaphosa's attack on the false narrative of white victimhood, as he says. And this is in direct reference to the United States, because he claims that the suggestion that South Africa is committing genocide, he says that, well, this has all been perpetrated by Afrikaners who are threatening South Africa's sovereignty by making these false allegations. And he calls for a global campaign against the narrative. And he links pushback against BEE, because BEE is another one of the key points that is currently in dispute in the Republic, to privilege protection rhetoric. I mean, this is kind of rich coming from a guy who at all costs will protect everything and sundry going around BEE, something that's enriched ANC elites. You could call that ANC privilege, but, you know, whatever. He also went on to reiterate his stance on Gaza and Israel, saying that South Africa's ICJ genocide case against Israel is justified because of what he describes as the daily breaches of the ceasefire agreement by the Israelis. Yep, no suggestions at all. The Hamas isn't disarming, still continues to fire at Israeli soldiers. I mean, what we've seen is that the hostilities and the negotiations are only ever from Israel to the poor Palestinians, which does yet again raise the logical question around Ramaphosa's impartiality. But let's be honest, he was never impartial on this. But let's also be honest and say, what the hell did this have to do with the renewal of the ANC? Surely the ANC should be focusing on the Republic. Yes, the very thing they're meant to be governing. They don't govern Gaza, they govern Syria.
The ANC has successfully embedded these principles within our democratic constitutional order. The sense of shared nationhood is well established among South Africans of all races. However, some in our society still adhere to notions of racial superiority and seek to maintain racial privilege. The vehement opposition by some groups to our policies of transformation and redress conveniently align with wider notions of white supremacy and white victimhood fed by false claims of the persecution of white Afrikaners in our country. The propaganda of these false claims has real implications for our sovereignty, international relations, and national security. It is essential that we counter this narrative and defeat this agenda through direct and frank engagement, mobilizing broad support for the South African vision of non-racialism, reconciliation, and transformation. And this is a campaign that needs to be launched not only in our country, but globally as well, particularly to address the false notions that some globally are perpetrating about what is happening in South Africa.
Now, in terms of the land question, Ramaphosa went on further to suggest that 25% of formerly white-owned land had been transferred to black people or the state. No sources given. So why the state? I don't know. Now, 61% of the national budget goes to the social wage. Yes, so 61% of our national budget after debt goes to paying grants. And yet again, Ramaphosa's like, aren't we great? Yay, how wonderful. He says that inflation is tapering, but frames poverty as South Africa's greatest challenge, but says that growth and employment are returning. Yeah, I don't know where, but he says that they are, so, trust me, bro. Now, critics note the mismatches between Ramaphosa's claims and the lived reality of most South Africans. And you know where we can see that most on display? Well, it's actually in the Springboks Rugby World Cup medal, which had been handed personally to Nelson Mandela. Now, apparently that medal, that Mandela medal, is now up for auction. Now, the actual medal itself is a symbol of optimism of the 1994 to the 1996 reconciliation era. But as the nation drifts away from the Rainbow Nation mythos, well, the actual medal itself has come up for auction, and it shows you exactly where we are as a state, with many individuals now selling away the promises of 94, thanks to the ANC being incapable of improving the lives of ordinary South Africans. At least that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and until next time, bye.